Shalom, shalom, shalom. Shalom, shalom to everybody. Good evening. I won't be before y'all long. It's going to go through some scriptures to talk about the commemoration of the Feast of Dedication. All right, Yahuwah, we bless you, we praise you, we adore you, we magnify you on this evening. We just thank you for everything that you're doing. We thank you for bringing us through another day. We just thank you for your grace and your mercy. We thank you that you are making a new covenant where you're putting your laws and commandments in our heart and in our mind. We just bless you. And we just thank you for taking us through everything we had to go through. We thank you for accepting the process because you said in your word that when we come into your son, Christ, Yeshua, the Messiah, we become a brand new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are new. And we just thank you because your word says that we are all walking in the newness of life. And we bless you and we praise you and we adore you in Yeshua's mighty name. All right, everybody, I'm not going to be before you all long. If you all would go with me to John chapter 10. We're going to start at John chapter 10. And then we're going to go on into the book of Maccabees. We're going to go into the history of how the children of Israel was going through stuff with the Greeks. It's a historical background of what the children of Israel was going through when you go into the book of Maccabees. And all of the book of Maccabees are very long chapters. The chapters are very long because it's a lot of information and it's a lot of history. If you read in the Apocrypha, you got First and Second Maccabees, and then you also have Third and Fourth Maccabees as well. So I'm gonna be reading some stuff from Third Maccabees, but we're gonna mainly be reading from the book of Maccabees, First and Second Maccabees, and so on. So I don't know if any of you all have an Apocrypha. If you do, then you can read along, or you can read it in Bible Gateway that I am putting up on the screen. You can read it in Bible Gateway. If you read BibleHub.com, if you go all the way to the right side of the screen and you click on where it says Bible, you will find the Apocrypha. So don't let no church folk tell you that you shouldn't be reading the Apocrypha. And the Apocrypha is in these websites that these preachers be reading. A lot of preachers probably don't know the book of the Apocrypha is in Bible Hub or Bible Gateway or the King James Version Bible Online. If you go scroll all the way down to kjvversion.com online, you will find the KJV Apocrypha and you can read it. So if your pastor tell you that Maccabees is not in Bible Gateway or whatever, then you can show him Bible Gateway that he be reading from. Okay? We got to stop all this lying. People be lying too much, lying to the saints. Okay, John chapter 10, verse 22. This is Yeshua at the Feast of Dedication. And it says at the time the Feast of Dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter. Are we in wintertime? Yes. It's been snowing here in Chicago for the last few weeks. It says, and Yeshua walking in the temple courts in Solomon's colonnade. So the Jews gathered around him and demanded, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. And he's telling them, I already told you, but you did not believe that the works that I do in my Father's name testify on my behalf. But because you are not my sheep, you refuse to believe. He said, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they will never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand. He says, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. All right. So that's giving you a clear-cut case that Yeshua and them was commemorating the Feast of Dedication. Now, let me say this. The Feast of Dedication is not a commandment that was given by Moses in Leviticus chapter 23. The Feast of Dedication is a remembrance of what happened to the children of Israel during the time when Antiochus Epiphanes started trying to get the children of Israel to follow the Greek way of life. All right, when you read in Leviticus chapter 23, Moses commands the people through the Spirit of Christ, because the Spirit of Christ spoke to Moses and the prophets. I have to keep saying that so church people can stop lying to people, making them think that you ain't supposed to know the Old Testament. All right, the Spirit of Christ spoke to Moses, he spoke to the prophets. And when we go into the book of Maccabees, the Spirit of Yeshua spoke through Maccabees. All right. All right. So when we go into it, we're going to go First Maccabees 1, chapter 10. All right. So this is the history of what the children of Israel was going through the Greeks. We have four kingdoms that have had their foot on the children of Israel's necks. We have Babylon, we have Persia, which was during the time of Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah. Then you had the Greeks, which is during this time in the book of Maccabees. And now Babylon, not Babylon, I'm sorry. Now Rome. Ever since the time of Christ, when Pontius Pilate and Caesar was in control, all the way from then, when Christ came in the flesh, all the way up until now. The Roman Empire is working through the seven heads and the 10 horns, which is the European Union, which is NATO, that you read about in Revelations chapter 17, which is ruled and controlled by Esau, which is Jacob's brother. All right. So we know that in Revelation chapter 4, Revelation chapter 5, it talks about the seven spirits, how Yeshua holds the seven spirits of the Most High. We know that in Isaiah chapter 11, it talks about what the seven spirits of Elohim is. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. Then also when you read in the book of Psalms, the Bible says that a man will be tried by fire 7 times. And we know that sometimes the Lord has to put fire on us to get the dross that Isaiah was talking about in the book of Isaiah, the dross, which is scum. Sometimes the Lord has to create in us a clean heart and renew in us a right spirit. All right. So when you look at First Maccabees chapter 1, there was a group of Israelites who decided that they wanted to honor the gods of the other nations. So how many times in the Old Testament did the Lord allow the other nations to afflict the children of Israel because of their disobedience? Right? Remember, he said in Deuteronomy 32, if you put up a no God over me, I'm going to put up a no people over you. Is a no people over us right now? Who's running the world right now under Satan? The other nations, right? Okay. So when you look at First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 10, it says, from them came forth a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus. He had been a hostage in Rome. He began to reign in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. See that? All right. So in Deuteronomy 29, verse 8, it says, make sure that there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our Elohim to go and worship the gods of those nations. See that? Now, the reason why it's saying that is because when we read later in the book of Maccabees, there were a group of Israelites who converted into the Greek way of life because of the pressure of the Greeks. All right. It says, make sure there is no root among you that bears such poisonous and bitter fruit. It said, because when such a person hears the words of this oath, he invokes a blessing on himself, saying, I will have peace, even though I walk in the stubbornness of my own heart. So we have to understand that when we're commemorating these feast days, we got to understand that this is a heart issue. We cannot be following these feast days because we're trying to prove a point, because we are walking in formality. We got to remember, he said that I will make a new covenant where I will put my laws in your heart. And how does that happen? Through the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that he promised in the book of Joel. If you know about being born again through the water and of the Spirit, I will suggest that you get born again before you start honoring these feast days. Just don't be doing it because you're trying to prove a point or you're trying to dodge something that you should be doing, because then all of that is in formality. You see what it just said here in Deuteronomy 29? It says, I will have peace even though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart. It says this will bring disaster on the watered land as well as the dry. You see that? All right. So look at First Maccabees 1, verse 11. It says, in those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. For since we separated from them, many disasters have come upon us. Just like when Yeshua was talking to what's his name? Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a master of the laws and the commandments, but Yeshua told him that you must be born again through the water and of the Spirit. All right. All right. Look at that. So here in First Maccabees 1 and 11, you got certain Israelites that decided that they want to make a covenant with the Greeks. See that? Around us, it says, for since we separated from many disasters have come upon us. Look at Deuteronomy 13. And we read this last week. Well, sometime this week in the lesson. Deuteronomy 13, verse 13. It says that wicked men have arisen from among you and have led the people of this city astray, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known. Then you must inquire, investigate, and interrogate thoroughly. That's the problem in the Black community. We don't inquire, investigate, and interrogate thoroughly about our leaders because we are not walking in the knowledge and the love and the belief of the truth of the word. We generally we are walking in the spirit of religion. So we don't inquire, investigate, and interrogate until something happens. And then there's a big scandal in the body of Yeshua, right? And it says, if that is established with certainty that this abomination has been committed among you, verse 15, you must surely put the inhabitants of that city to the sword, devote to destruction all its people and livestock. So here in the book of Maccabees, this is the start of the children of Israel wanting to follow the Greek customs of the Greeks. All right. Look at First Maccabees chapter 7, verse 5. It says, then there came to him all the renegade and godless men of Israel. They were led by alchemists who wanted to be high priest. They brought to the king this acquisition against the people. Judas and his brothers have destroyed all your friends and have driven us out of our land. It says, now then, send a man whom you trust. Let him go and see all the ruin that Judas has brought on us and the land of the king, and let him punish them, and all will help. So Judas Maccabees was an Israelite from the tribe of Judah, who the Spirit of the Lord laid upon to create a revolt against the Greeks. All right. So you got some of these Israelite men who are upset because the Spirit of the Lord has laid on Judas to destroy all of these Greek customs that has been afflicting the people. All right. So look at First Maccabees 9:23. Now, this is talking about after Judas died. So we kind of going back and forth and just flipping back and forth through this stuff here. So this is First Maccabees 9:23. It says, after the death of Judas, the renegades emerged in all parts of Israel. All the wrongdoers reappeared. So this is after Judas Maccabees died. Okay, this is after he died. So all the wrongdoers of the children of Israel reappeared, right? And it says, in those days, a very great famine occurred, and the country went over to their side. And it says, and Bachahites chose the godless and put them in charge of the country. Verse 26. It says, they made inquiry and searched for the friends of Judas and brought them to Bachahites, who took vengeance on them and made sport of them. So there was great distress in Israel, such as had not been since the time a prophet had last appeared among them. Look at verse 28. It says that all the friends of Judas assembled and said to Jonathan, it says, since the death of your brother Judas, there has not been no one like him to go against our enemies and Bachahites and to deal with those of our nation who hate us. So now, since Judas Maccabees have died, the people are asking his brother for him to take charge and take leadership, right? Look at verse 30. It says, now, therefore, we have chosen you today to take his place as our ruler and leader to fight our battle. So Jonathan accepted the leadership at that time in place of his brother Judas. All right. So Matthias was the father of Jonathan and Judas, the Maccabees family. All right. We're going to go into that, but we're just going through scriptures because a lot of people have not read the book of Maccabees. They don't even know what it is. But the book of Maccabees is showing the Greek persecution that the children of Israel endured. A lot of people don't know that history about our people. All right. Now we know about what happened with Babylon in the Bible, what happened with Persia, what happened with Rome at the start of Christ, but we don't know really about the history about the Greeks. When you read the book of Maccabees, you're basically reading you're basically looking at the movie School Days. All right, because in the movie School Days, you remember Lawrence Fishburne was trying to show the people on the campus who they were as a black people, remember? But then that other guy was in that Greek fraternity, and he didn't want to hear nothing about being black and doing all of that stuff. You see what I'm saying? All right. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So let's go to First Maccabees chapter 11, verse 20. It says, in those days, Jonathan assembled the Judeans to attack the citadel in Jerusalem. And he built many engines of war to use against this. He was angry. And as soon as he heard it, he set out to come to Philippius. I can't pronounce these words. And he wrote Jonathan not to continue the siege, but to meet him for a conference at Philippius as quickly as possible, right? And it says, when Jonathan heard this, He gave orders to continue the siege. He chose many of the elders of Israel and some of the priests and put himself in danger. For he went to the king at Paniplius, taking silver and gold and clothing and numerous other gifts, and he won his favor. Although certain renegades of his nations kept making complaints against him. All right, now let's go back to First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 13. And it says, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the nations. All right, now look at Second Maccabees chapter 4, verse 7. It says, when Seleucus died and Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, succeeded to the kingdom. It says Jason, the brother of Nonius, obtained the high priesthood by corruption. Y'all see that? So this is showing how the Greeks, that Greek spirit started corrupting people in the children of Israel, right? Look at verse 8. This is Second Maccabees 4 and 8. It says, promising the king through a petition 360 talents of silver, and from another source of revenue 80 talents, right? Look at verse 9. It says, in addition to this, he promised to pay 150 more if permission were given to establish by his authority a gymnasium and a body of youth for it to enroll the people in Jerusalem as the Antiochians in Jerusalem. When the king ascended and Jason came to office, he at once shifted his compatriots over to the Greek way of life. So y'all see that? So now it's showing that one of the children of Israel, Jason, starts to reform to the Greek way of life. Y'all see that? All right. So First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 14. It says, so they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the nations. Now later on, we're gonna go into the book of Maccabees, how the children of Israel built a gymnasium unto the Olympian god Zeus. All right, so it's showing you that right here. So this is First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 14. It says, so they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the nations. All right, so look at Second Maccabees chapter 4, verse 9. It says, in addition to this, he promised to pay 150 more if permission were given to the established by his authority a gymnasium and a body of youth for it, and to enroll the people in Jerusalem and Antiochus in Jerusalem. All right, now look at verse 12. This is Second Maccabees chapter 4, verse 12. It says he took delight in establishing a gymnasium right under the citadel, and he inducted the noblest of the young men to wear the Greek hat. So you see that? So when you look at First Maccabees 1 and 14, it says they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the nations. So now in Second Maccabees chapter 4, verse 12, he says he took delight in establishing a gymnasium right under the citadel, and he inducted the noblest of the young men to wear the Greek hat. So this is what the Olympics is all about. The Olympics is about honoring Greek and Roman gods. That's why they have the Olympics, so that you all know. All right. Look at First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 15. And it says, and made foreskin for themselves and abandoned what? The Holy Covenant. So this is showing that they abandoned the laws and the commandments of their God, which is the Most High God, Elohim, Yahuwah, right? Our Lord, right? And it says they joined with who? With the nations and sold themselves to do what? To do evil. See that? Now, let's look at Third Maccabees chapter 2, verse 25. All right. If you want to find Third and Fourth Maccabees, you can Google it. You got 1, 2, 3, 4 book of Maccabees. First Maccabees, second Maccabees, third Maccabees, and fourth Maccabees. It's a lot of information in the book of Maccabees that's showing us how the Greeks was trying to plunder us and how some of our people even begin to start following the Greek way of life. All right. This is third Maccabees chapter 2, verse 25. It says, when he arrived in Egypt, he increased in his deeds of malice, abetted by the previously mentioned drinking companions and comrades who were strangers to everything just. He was not content with his uncounted lasciviousness deeds, but even continued with such audacity that he established an evil reputation in various localities. And many of his friends, intently observing the king's purpose, themselves also followed his will. He proposed to inflict public disgrace on the nation, and he set up a stone on the tower and the courtyard with this inscription: none of those who do not sacrifice shall enter their sanctuaries, and all the Jews shall be subjected to a registration involving poll tax and to the status of slaves. Y'all see that? Now look at this. Look at what it says here. It says those who object to this are to be taken by force and put to death. Those who are registered are also to be branded on their bodies by fire with the ivy leaf symbol of Dionysius. All right, now Dionysius is the Greek god that wears the grapes on his head. The Dionysus, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, is Dionys. That is the god of partying and intoxication. Okay, it's that Greek god that got the grapes on its head. That's the god of partying. All right, when you go to parties and people be acting crazy and doing whatever, they're honoring that God. Okay, and it says, and they also shall be reduced to their former limited status. All right, so they're telling the children of Israel, if you do not follow these Greek gods, you're gonna be put to death. Right, and it said, look what it says, and they shall also be reduced to their former limited status. Look at what it says in verse 30. It says, in order that he might not appear to be an enemy of all, he inscribed below, but if any of them prefer to join those who have been initiated into the mysteries, they shall have equal citizenship with the Alexandrians. See, that kind of sound like Greek fraternities, right? Greek fraternities be giving you ultimatums and telling you what's going to happen to you if you don't do this and if you don't do that, right? That's what it sounds like, right? All right, look at verse 31. It says, now some with an obvious abhorrence of the price to be exacted for maintaining the piety of their city readily gave themselves up, since they expected to enhance their reputation by their future association with the king. But the majority acted firmly with a courageous spirit and did not abandon their piety, which means that they said, we're not going to give up on our God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look at what it says. And it says, by paying money in exchange for life, they boldly attempted to save themselves from the registration. See that? Look at verse 33. They remained resolutely hopeful of obtaining help, and they abhorred those who separated themselves from them, considering them to be enemies of the nation and depriving them of common fellowship and mutual help. Y'all see that? So let's look at what Elijah said to Ahab in the book of 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 20. It says, Ahab said to Elijah, have you found me, O my enemy? Then Elijah answered and said, I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. So, in other words, Elijah is telling Ahab that you decided that you're going to listen to the devil through your wife, Jezebel. That's what he's saying. He said, you didn't look at what Elijah say, 1 Kings 21:20. He says, you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Look at 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 20. It says, after subduing Egypt, Antiochus turned back in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. All right, look at 2 Maccabees chapter 5, verse 11. It says, when the news of what had happened reached the king, he took it to mean that Judea was in revolt. Right? So now Judea is saying, no, we're not going to be dealing with the Greek way of life. We're not going to do this. All right, this is 2 Maccabees 5, verse 11. It says, when news of what had happened reached the king, he took it to mean that Judea was in revolt. So raging inwardly, he left Egypt and took the city by storm. Verse 12, he commanded his soldiers to cut down relentlessly everyone they met and to kill those who went into their houses. Look at verse 13. It says, then there was a massacre of young and old, destruction of boys, women, and children, and slaughter of young girls and infants. Verse 14, it says, within the total of 3 days, 80,000 were destroyed, 40,000 in hand-to-hand fighting, and as many were sold into slavery and killed. So when the king found out that the children of Israel didn't want to deal with, hey, shalom, how you doing, brother? Hey, brother T, how you doing? Shalom. When he found out that the children of Israel didn't want to deal with the Greek way of life, 80,000 children of Israel got slaughtered and got killed. Y'all see that? All right. Look at this. Look at verse 15. It says, not content with this, Antiochus dared to enter the most holy temple in all the world, guarded by Manipulus, who had become a traitor both to the laws and to his country. Look at verse 16. He took the holy vessels with his polluted hands and swept away with profane hands and votive offerings that other kings had made to enhance the glory and the honor of the place. So that means that Antiochus Epiphanes took the showbread, he took the lampstand, he took all of the holy vessels in the temple, and he took them out of there. All right. All right, look at 1 Maccabees 1 and 21. It says he arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar, the lampstand for the light, and all its utensils. Y'all see that, y'all? All right, look at verse 23, 1 Maccabees 1 and 23. He took the silver and the gold and the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures that he found. It's just like in 1948 when the synagogue of Satan, the Jewish Zionists, took all the gold and silver out of Solomon's temple. Even Solomon's temple was made out of silver and gold, inside and out. And they took the silver and gold and took it to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Then they took the rest of the silver and gold and took it to the Queen of England in the United Kingdom. So that gold and silver that they trade on the stock market is the children of Israel's gold and silver. That's why Yeshua said in Haggai 2 and 8, the gold is mine, the silver is mine. See that? And they got us over here in the Western world pimping and prostituting for paper. Right? All right. First Maccabees. Where am I at now? Okay, First Maccabees 1 and 23, he took silver and the gold, the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures that was found. Look at First Maccabees chapter 2, verse 9. It says, her glorious vessels have been carried into exile. Her infants have been killed in her streets, her youths by the sword of the foe. So Antiochus killed all the children. He took all the glorious vessels out of the temple. right? It's just like what it's saying, Lamentations chapter 2, verse 11. Yeah, Solomon said, Lamentations chapter 2, verse 11. I believe this is Jeremiah saying this. Lamentations chapter 2, verse 11. It says, my eyes are worn out from weeping. My stomach is in knots. My heart is poured out on the ground due to the destruction of my helpless people. Children and infants faint in the town squares. Y'all see that? That's a cross reference to what the devil used Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was a form of Antichrist. All right. So when the children of Israel decided to worship the other gods of the nations, here in First Maccabees chapter 1, the Spirit of the Lord allowed Antiochus Epiphanes to overrun the children of Israel. That's how the spirit realm works. What we have to understand, when we disobey the Father, right? All of the other principalities and powers of the other nations, they have access and they have carte blanche to afflict us. And we be sitting up in church in prayer trying to figure out, Lord God, in the name of Jesus, Lord, I need help. I don't know why. I'm gonna tell you why what's going on. First of all, the Christian church lie to people and tell people not to follow God's laws and commandments, which is the righteousness of the kingdom, who is Christ, the Messiah, because he was the living word, the Torah, the law, wisdom in the flesh. All right. When you read in the legends of the Jews, you can Google it. In the legends of the Jews, it explains, right, that the other nations, principalities, and powers have access to afflict the Most High's people when we disobey the Most High. That's how it works. If we learn how to be obedient, things back off from you. And you got people sitting up in the Christian church every day trying to figure out why they suffering or why they going through this or why I ain't got that. Because we are disobedient and don't even know why. That's why we're teaching this video here about the Feast of Dedication, right? When everybody else is following Christmas, right? I'm just saying. This is why things ain't happening, because we're disobedient to the word. All right. So in the book of Maccabees, when the children of Israel decided that they wanted to honor the gods of the other nations, that's when the Greeks started overrunning us. If you read all in the history of the Old Testament, that's what happened. So this is why in Deuteronomy 32, he said, if you put up a no God over me, I'm going to put up a no people over you. All right. We got to keep that in mind. All right. So where we at? So let's go back. Where we at? Okay, First Maccabees 1:24. It says, taking them all, he went into his own land. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. Look at verse 27. It says, every bridegroom took up the lament. She who sat in the bridal chamber was mourning. All right. Look at Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 30. It says, for the people of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set up their abominations in the house that bears my name, and so have defiled it. Look at verse 31. They have built the high places of Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so they can burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I never commanded, nor did it even enter my mind. Look at verse 32. This is what the Lord said. The Lord said, I didn't tell y'all to burn y'all sons and daughters in the fire. All right, let me explain what that means in another term. When you take your kids out on trick-or-treating and they dress up in uniforms and stuff, that's crossing the fire. It tell you that in the book of Deuteronomy. It says, don't cause your children to cross the fire. Even when you read in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 10, when it says that they cut down a tree and decked the tree with silver and gold, and they honored the queen of heaven. Here in Chicago, whenever they have the lighting of the Christmas tree, I don't know if they still do it, but they would have a parade when they will honor, the light of the Christmas tree. They hold up this big old statue of a woman. That woman, that's the queen of heaven. All right. You read about that in Jeremiah chapter 10, right? All right. Anything that you do when you're dressing your kids up in costumes and going trick-or-treating and having your kids hold Easter eggs and all that stuff, all that's having your children cross the fire, because that's teaching your children the abomination of the other nations' idols and gods. Right? Remember, I talked about what Easter was in one of the lessons, right? When you honor Easter, you're honoring a god named Semiramis, right? Or Tammuz. Remember in the book of Ezekiel when the women was in the temple weeping for Tammuz? Why was the women weeping for Tammuz? Because Tammuz is a fertility god, that a fertility, right? That deal with eggs, right? That's why you deal with Easter eggs on Easter, because you're honoring a fertility god named Tammuz. Now, who is Tammuz? Tammuz was the son of Nimrod and his mama Semiramis. Because remember, Nimrod married his mama Semiramis, and they had sex, and they had a son named Tammuz. And when Tammuz died, he reincarnated into a fertility god like an Easter egg. See what I'm saying? So when we honoring this stuff, we don't know what demon and god we're dealing with. Where in the Bible did it say that Christ honored Easter? I got a god brother that passed away a few years ago, Apostle Lance the Lashman. He died in 2022, I believe. And I found a video of him on YouTube talking about how Christ did not follow Easter, that he followed Passover. And he had just got through teaching that in his church that particular day. You see what I'm saying? So my god brother died in the truth. He knew it. It was in his heart. You see what I'm saying? So get rid of them Easter eggs and stop having your children dress up for Easter, because Christ didn't follow it. Now, in the Bible, it explains that King Herod followed it, because King Herod was a Greek and a Roman. Easter is a Greek and a Roman festival and custom. It's not for Hebrews. All right? All right. So look what it's saying, Jeremiah chapter 7. Chapter 7, where I'm at, verse 31, it says, they built the high places of Topath in the valley of Ben Hinnom so they could burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I never commanded, nor did it even enter my mind. The Lord is saying this stuff, I ain't thinking about this stuff. Y'all thinking about this. Look at verse 32. It says, so behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when this place will no longer be called Topath in the valley of Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. Ain't that what it just happened to the children of Israel in the book of Maccabees? They started slaughtering the children when they didn't want to follow a Greek way of life. See that? It says, for they will bury the dead in Topath until there is no more room. Look at verse 33. It says, the corpses of this people will become food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and there will be no one to scare them away. I will remove from the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem the sounds of joy and gladness and the voices of the bride and the bridegroom, for the land will become a wasteland. Ain't that what he was talking about in Lamentations chapter 2? All right, look at Jeremiah 16:9. It says, for this is what the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says. I am going to remove from this place before your very eyes and in your days the sound of joy and gladness, the voices of the bride and bridegroom. All right, let's look at the cross reference to that. Let's go back to 3rd Maccabees chapter 4. 3rd Maccabees chapter 4 verse 6 says what? And it says, and the young women who had just entered the bridal chamber to share married life, exchange for joy and wailing. Their mirth perfumed hair sprinkled with ashes, and were carried away unveiled, all together raising a lament instead of a wedding song. See? As they were torn by the harsh treatment of the foreign nations. Y'all see this? See, they ain't going to teach this on church on Sunday morning. They are not going to go into the book of Maccabees tomorrow morning. You better believe it, they ain't. Look, y'all see this? Look at this. This is 3rd Maccabees chapter 4, verse 7. It says, in bonds and in the public view, they were violently what? Dragged along as far as the place of embarkment. Hold on. They were dragged, right? Oh. What happened on the movie Django? Remember on the movie Django when Jamie Foxx and that Dennis went to the plantation where Don Johnson was the plantation guy? And remember when Jamie Foxx was walking to get the Brittle brothers, he was going to go kill them. Remember they was dragging that black woman to the tree to get whipped. Remember? See, the Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. So stop letting these lying Negroes tell y'all that it don't matter. Because this Bible is the children of Israel's history book. I'm trying to tell you. Read Deuteronomy chapter 28. Think about them dragging our women to the tree down south to get whipped on a tree. Even the men. But it happened on Django. Remember? The girl was getting dragged because she dropped the eggs. And the white man was dragging and said, come on now. Come on. And she was like, no, no. Remember? He like, give me that arm. And then that other guy was whipping with the whip and reading them scriptures and had all the scriptures all over him. Right? And then Jamie Foxx came and shot the guy in the heart. And then he whipped that guy to death, didn't he? He was like, what? Right? But they was dragging. So let's go back. 3rd Maccabees. 3rd Maccabees chapter 4. Where we at? Verse 7, in bonds and in public view, they were violently dragged, like on Django, along as far as the place of embarkment. Not just in Django, but that happened in slave days for real. Verse 8, their husbands in the prime of youth, their necks encircled with ropes instead of garlands, spent the remaining days of their marriage festival in lamentations instead of feasting and youthful rivalry, seeing Hades already lying at their feet. Y'all know that on Django, remember on Django, when they was walking around with them yoke of irons on their neck? What do it say in the book of Deuteronomy? It says, you shall have a yoke of iron on your neck. Who is that talking about? The tribe of Judah, the Negroes in North America. See? Even when you read in Psalms 147, when David said that I saw my people weeping under the willow tree by the rivers of Babylon, right? Where do willow trees grow up in? And down south, here in America, right? That's slavery. You say, what a Sherelle? Well, you know, see, Sister Sherelle, our people, we are visually stimulated people. That's why I have to do theatrics, because we're visually stimulated. We don't like to sit and learn the word. That's why we like going to church, because they quote a few scriptures and we shout and dance and speak in tongues and then go home. We ain't going to be sitting through no Bible class and going through all these scriptures. We don't like that. All right. We like to operate in formality. What did the Bible say? It says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, he said, I will heal the land. We don't like to sit and listen to the word. We like, man, I don't want to hear all that. If Bishop Jakes didn't say it, I don't want to hear it. That's us. If Joel Osteen don't say it, it ain't God. That's how people think. That's how our people are. We don't like to sit to get a word. That's why we like religion. Religion ain't gonna teach you nothing. right? All right. First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 12. Oh, what was I saying? I was talking about the yoke of iron. Yeah. When when you read in the book of Deuteronomy, it said that we should have a yoke of iron on our neck. Did we have a yoke of iron on our neck in slavery? Yeah. Google it. Google black people having a yoke of iron on their neck in slavery. You're gonna find a whole lot of pictures. It was Moses was prophesying to us about what would happen to us if we disobeyed the Father. All right. All right. First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 29. It says, 2 years later, the king sent to the cities of Judah a chief collector of tribute, and he came to Jerusalem with a large force. Deceitfully, he spoke peaceable words to them, and they believed him. But he suddenly fell upon the city, dealt it with severe blow, and destroyed many people of Israel. Now look at this. This is Second Maccabees chapter 5, verse 24. It says, Antiochus sent Apollonius, the captain of the Mysians, with an army of 22,000, and commanded him to kill all the grown men and to sell the women and boys as slaves. See, they've been selling us as slaves. Let me say this. When you read Revelation 2 and 9, it says, for those that call themselves Jews and are not, but they are the synagogue of Satan, right? So you mean to tell me, Mr. Jewish man, Mr. Goldberg, that you were the one that was in slavery under the Egyptians in the Bible? Okay. I ain't never heard a Jewish person say, yeah, that was us. We were in slavery under the Egyptians in the Bible. Yeah. No, well, the Egyptians were black and they were from the seed of Ham, and y'all was under slavery under them. If Jewish people was in slavery under the Egyptians in the Bible, then that means y'all the children of Israel then, right? Right. Just saying. Just asking. Right? All right, so let's go back. Where am I at? All right, Second Maccabees chapter 5, verse 24. What it say? It says, with an army of 20,000, commanding them to kill all the grown men and to sell the women and boys as slaves. Right? What the scriptures say, I believe, is Jeremiah 2 and 14 or Jeremiah 14 and 2. I don't remember. It says, why is Israel spoiled and why is he a homeborn slave? If you look at the Western world, this place, America, Babylon, modern day Egypt, has spoiled the HE hockey sticks out of us. We are brats. When the Lord tell us something, we like, Lord, I don't want to do that. I'm going to be able to go to the club. We are brats. That's why the Lord got to break us and purge us from things. That's why some of us are sick. We don't obey. Look at verse 25. It's 2 Maccabees 5 and 25. It says, when this man arrived in Jerusalem, he pretended to be peaceably disposed and waited until the holy Sabbath day. Then, finding the Jews not at work, he ordered his troops to parade under arms. Verse 26. He put to the sword all those who came out to see them, then rushed into the city with his armed warriors and killed great numbers of people. Here's the Greek history about us right here, how the Greeks is doing us in the book of Maccabees. Look at First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 33. It says, then they fortified the city of David with a large, strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. Look at First Maccabees chapter 3, verse 27. It says the policy of Antiochus, right? This is the policy of Antiochus Epiphanes, which is the Greek leader, right? It says, verse 27, First Maccabees 3 and 27. It says, when King Antiochus heard these reports, he was greatly angered. And he sent and gathered all the forces of his kingdom, a very strong army. Verse 28. He opened his coffers and gave a year's pay to his forces and ordered them to be ready for any need. Then he saw that the money in the treasury was exhausted, and that the tribute payments from the country were small because of the dissension and the disaster that he had caused in the land of abolishing the laws that that had existed from the earliest days. Look at verse 30. He feared that he might not have such funds as he had before for his expenses, and for the gifts that he used to give lavishly than preceding kings. He was greatly perplexed in mind. Then he determined to go to Persia and collect the tribute payments from those regions and raise a large fund. Look at this. Verse 32. He left Lystrius, and a distinguished man of royal lineage, in charge of the king's affairs from the river Euphrates to the border of Egypt. Lysias was also to take care of his son Antiochus until he returned. Verse 34. And he turned over to Lysias half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him orders about all that he wanted done. And the residents of Judea and Jerusalem, look at verse 35. Lysias was to send a force against them to wipe out and destroy the strength of Israel. So Antiochus had to go to this other guy to raise some money in Persia in order to send him to destroy the children of Israel. See that? Look at this. Half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him orders. Now look at what it says. He says, verse 35, this is First Maccabees 3 and 35. Lysias was to send a force against them to wipe out and destroy the strength of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem. And he was to banish the memory of them from that place. Remember, the Bible says in the book of Psalms 83, it says that all the nations became confederate to make sure that the name of Israel is no more in remembrance. Right? Look at verse 36. It says, verse 36, settle strangers in all their territory and distribute their land by lot. Then the king took the remaining half of his forces and left Antioch, his capital, in the 147th year. He crossed the Euphrates River and went through the upper provinces. All right. Now look at First Maccabees 4 and 41. Then Judas, now this is when Judas Maccabees was still alive. All right. First Maccabees 4 and 41. It says, then Judas detailed men to fight against those in the citadel until he had cleansed the sanctuary. Now let's go there right quick. I want to read that chapter. Hold on a second. Let's go to First Maccabees chapter 4. Let's go there. All right, now look at this. Look at this. Now this is verse 1. This is First Maccabees chapter 4, verse 1. It says, then Gordon took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and this division moved out of sight to fall upon the camps of the Jews and attack them suddenly. Men from the citadel were his guides. But now Judas Maccabees heard about this, right? So it says, but Judas Maccabees heard of it, and he and his warriors moved out to attack the king's force in Impius, while the division was still absent from the camp, right? It says, when Gregorius entered the camp of Judas by night, he found no one there. So he looked for them in the hills because he said, these men are running away from us. Y'all see that? So after Judas Maccabees heard that these guys was coming after them, Judah Maccabees said, hey man, let's go. Let's run away right quick so they won't try to get us. So look at verse 6. It says at daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men, but they did not have armor and swords such as they desired. And they saw the camp of the nations, strong and fortified, with cavalry all around it. And these men were trained in war. See that? But Judas said to those who were with him, do not fear their numbers or be afraid when they charge. It says, remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh with his forces pursued them. Do y'all see this? Man, Judas Maccabees was a warrior. See, this is all the spirit of Christ raising up in Judas Maccabees. That's why Christ was reminiscent about what he was reminiscent about in John chapter 10, verse 22. All right, we got to remember, it was the spirit of Christ that helped the children of Israel over the Red Sea. It was the spirit of Christ that told Abraham, don't kill your only son, Isaac. It was the spirit of Christ that told, what's his name in the book of Joshua? He said, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. That was Christ the whole time. It was Christ that was speaking through Moses through the burning bush. You see what I'm saying? So it was Christ helping the Maccabees to conquer the Greeks. Hey, shalom, bro. How you doing, Jeff? All right. So let me go back to Maccabees first Maccabees chapter 4. So now Judas is saying to those, he said, don't fear them. We ain't scared of them. First Maccabees chapter 4. Look at verse 9. It says, remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh with his forces pursued them. Look at verse 10. It says, and now let us cry to heaven to see whether he will favor us and remember his covenant with our ancestors and crush this army before us today. Look at verse 11. Then all the nations will know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel. Look at verse 12. It says, when the foreigners looked up and saw them coming against them, they went out from their camps to battle. Then the men with Judas Maccabees blew their trumpets and engaged in battle. The nations were crushed and fled in the plain, and all those in the rear fell by the sword. They pursued them to Gazria, to the plains of Idumea, and to Antreus and Gemina, and 3,000 of them fell. Then Judas Maccabees and his force turned back from pursuing them. Y'all see that? So I just wanted to read that part about how Judas Maccabees was brave. He was like, hey, man, let's come up against God, right? All right. Let's go to First Maccabees chapter 6, verse 26, because now this is the last days of Antiochus Epiphanes, which was the Greek leader, right? Look at First Maccabees 6 and 26, and it says, and see today that we have a camps against the citadel in Jerusalem to take it. They have fortified both the sanctuary and Beth Zerar. Look at First Maccabees 1 and 34. It says they stationed there a sinful nation, men who were renegades. They strengthened their position. Okay, look at what it says in the book of Tobit. Now, the book of Tobit is in the Apocrypha. All right, read the book of Tobit. It'll blow your mind 1,000 times. It's a deep book. All right. Read the book of Tobit, T-O-B-I-T. Tobit chapter 13, verse 6. Look what it says. It says, if you turn to him with all your heart and with all your soul to do what is true before him, then he will turn to you and will no longer hide his face from you. All right. So now see what he has done for you. Acknowledge him at the top of your voice. Bless the Lord of righteousness and exalt the King of the ages. Okay. Y'all see that? I just had to read that to y'all so y'all know what it means. All right. Where am I at now? Verse 34. I'm in First Maccabees. Let me go back to chapter 1. Because I'm telling y'all, Maccabees, it's a lot of information. All of the chapters of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and 4th Maccabees are long because it's a lot of information about what happened to us dealing with the Greeks. I'm telling you, it's a lot. It's a lot to read, y'all. Okay? Okay, I'm trying to figure out what verse am I at now because I was just reading verse 34. All right. Okay, so First Maccabees chapter 32. Am I at 35? Okay, I'm gonna read verse 35. I'm gonna read verse 34. No, I just read verse 34. I'm sorry. All right, First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 35. It says they stored up arms and food and collecting the spoils of Jerusalem They stored them there and became a great menace. Now look at verse 36. Look at First Maccabees chapter 36. It says, for the citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary, an evil adversary of Israel at all times. Now look at First Maccabees chapter 13, verse 51. It says, on the 33rd day of the second month, in the 171st year, the Jews entered it with the praise and palm branches, and with harps and cymbals and string instruments, and with hymns and songs, because a great enemy had been crushed and removed from Israel. All right. Now look at First Maccabees 1 and 37. It says, on every side of the sanctuary, they shed innocent blood. They even defiled the sanctuary. Right. So it goes back to what David said in Psalm 79, verse 1. David says, oh God, the nations have come into your inheritance. They have defiled your holy temple. They have laid Jerusalem in ruins. They have given the bodies of your servants to the birds of the air for food, the flesh of your faithful to the wild animals of the earth. They have poured out their blood like water all around Jerusalem, and there was no one to bury them. Y'all see that? Y'all see all this mess they done did? Look at this, y'all. Even when you read, look at this. When you read in First Maccabees chapter 7. Not First Maccabees, Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees chapter 7. A mother and her 7 sons died for the faith, y'all. You know why? If you read Second Maccabees chapter 7, it was a woman that had 7 sons. And Antiochus Epiphanes, Greek soldiers, tried to force swine's flesh, pig fat in their mouth to eat it. And all 7 of her sons would not eat it. And they all got murdered and killed by those Greek soldiers because they wouldn't eat it, including their mother. They killed their mama too. See all that history? That's in Second Maccabees chapter 7. I'm just giving y'all a lot of history because it's a lot of reading, and I ain't gonna read all of it. Y'all got to read it yourself. Okay. Even in Second Maccabees, Second Maccabees chapter 2, it says there were people that hid in the tent of the Lord's presence. It says how Solomon celebrated the festival, Nehemiah's library, and the invitation to celebrate the festival. It was people that was hiding in caves, running away from the Greeks, just so they can honor the feast days and the Sabbath days. Then in Second Maccabees chapter 6, it says the Jews are persecuted because of their faith temple of Zeus, the god of hospitality. So you had Jews, Israelites, that had built temples unto the Olympian god Zeus. All right, it's a lot of information in the book of Maccabees. All right. Even in the book of Maccabees, I got to find the scripture. I didn't have it in my notes here, but even in the book of Maccabees, the children of Israel started sacrificing the money in the temple of Jerusalem to Hercules, which is a Greek god. See what I'm saying? Then there's another story. They killed the priest Eleazar in the book of Maccabees. Then the Greeks, when they took over the temple in the book of Maccabees, they was having sex with prostitutes in the temple. They put a big old swine pig on the table and was eating swine flesh in the temple. They hung up Greek gods on the wall, and then they was having sex with prostitutes in the temple. So when the Holy Spirit rose up in Judah's Maccabees and they killed and conquered the Greeks, they rededicated the temple back to the Lord. See what I'm saying? That's why we commemorate the Feast of Dedication. It's all in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and 4th Maccabees. All right. We did not learn this church stuff in the Christian church. They didn't teach us this stuff. All right. So let me go back. I just want to give y'all a more synopsis about the book of Maccabees. It's a lot of stuff, right? Look at 1st Maccabees chapter 1, verse 39. It says, her sanctuary became desolate like a desert. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into a reproach, her honor into contempt. Right? Look at Amos chapter 8, verse 7. It says, the Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, because we can have a lot of pride, y'all. The Lord cannot stand. Let me tell you something about the 12 tribes of Jacob. We are a very proud people, especially the tribe of Benjamin, the Jamaicans. No offense, Benjamites. I ain't trying to, I'm just saying we do. Right? Look at Amos chapter 8, verse 7. This is how the Lord feel about us. See, in the church, they're going to make you feel good. Look at Amos chapter 8, verse 7. The Lord has sworn by the pride of Jacob, surely I will never forget any of their deeds. See, the Lord ain't forgot what we did. He shall not the land tremble on this account, and everyone mourn who lives in it, and all of it rise like the Nile, and be tossed about and sink again like the Nile of Egypt. On that day, says the Lord God, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your feasts into mourning and all your songs into lamentation. I will bring sackcloth on all the loins and baldness on every head. I will make it like the morning for only the sun, and the end of it like a bitter day. Even in the book of Tobit, in the Apocrypha. Now listen. If your pastor tomorrow say, Pastor, this guy was reading something about the book of Tobit, and I ain't never heard of it. He's like, don't worry about that. That ain't God. All right, if he say that, then when you go to the book of Tobit, chapter 2, in the Apocrypha, Tobit is quoting Amos. Hello. All right. I'm just saying, just in case your pastor try to lie to you, you can have proof. Because all of these scriptures go together. The devil just knew what to separate. All right. Tobit chapter 2, verse 6. It says, then I remembered the prophecy of Amos, how he said against Bethel, your festivals shall be turned into mourning and all your songs into lamentations. And I wept. So Tobit is saying when he read Amos, he cried. See what I'm saying? All right. 1st Maccabees chapter 1, verse 42. And it says, all that shall give up their particular customs, all the nations accepted the commandment of the king. Look at 1st Maccabees 2 and 19. It says, but Matthias answered and said in a loud voice, even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him, and have chosen to obey his commandments, every one of them abandoning the religion of their ancestors. So Matthias in 1st Maccabees 2 and 19 is Judah's Maccabees' father. All right. So he's saying, hey, if the children of Israel want to obey this king, his Greek customs, that means that Yahuwah's people is not going to obey their covenant. Look at 2nd Maccabees 6, verse 4. 2nd Maccabees 6, verse 4. For the temple was filled with debauchery. Hold on. This is explaining what they was doing in the temple. Y'all see what's getting ready to go down? Look at this. This is why the temple had to be rededicated, right? 2nd Maccabees chapter 6, verse 4. It says, for the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the nation. So that means the Greeks was in there getting it on. They was doing what people do, you know, when you go to Greek fraternities. When you watch, what's that movie that Jim Belushi was in? What's that movie that Jim Belushi was in when they was in college and they was living in that fraternity and they was always partying and stuff? You know, even when you watch Revenge of the Nerds and they was in their Greek fraternity, what was they doing? They was partying, right? What was the name of that movie Jim Belushi was in? It was funny. It's a classic movie. I can't think of it. Even on Revenge of the Nerves. Remember that song they did on Revenge of the Nerves? Remember that? That was cold though. I can't remember that rap that guy was doing on Revenge of the Nerves, but it was bad, boy. Them nerds created that beat. Lambda, lambda. What's that song, Jeff? Y'all still there? on Revenge of the Nerds? He said, lambda, 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 and omega move. Remember that? Boy, they put them jocks to shame with that. They had all the computerized music. And then that nerd was playing the what was that, the violin? That was cold. He said, we come to do a show for you, or something he did. Oh, lambda, 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 and omega move. We got, I can't remember, but that stuff was so cold. I probably had to Google it. What's the name of that movie? Y'all ain't forgot with Jim Belushi. Something house, something frat house, or something like that. Even over here in Chicago, in this neighborhood I live in. Sometimes when I take a jog and I go by the University of Chicago, they got Greek fraternities and they be partying and stuff. They got all the Greek symbols on the house and everything. All right, let me go back. Y'all know he's silly. All right. Second Maccabees chapter 6, verse 4. They're gonna show you what these Greeks did to the temple. Second Maccabees 6 and 4. It says, but the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling of the nations, who dallied with prostitutes and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and besides brought in things for sacrifice that were unfit. Verse 5. The altar was covered with abominable offerings that was forbidden by the laws. Verse 6, people could neither keep the Sabbath nor observe the festivals of their ancestors, nor so much as confess themselves to be Jews. Y'all see that? So those Greeks came in there partying like it's 1999 in the Lord's temple. See that? Look at Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. It says, forces sent by him shall occupy and profane the temple and fortress. They shall abolish the regular burnt offerings and set up the desolating sacrilege. So when Satan is worshiped in the temple, like Paul said in 2 Thessalonians, he's the abomination of desolation that Daniel is talking about here, and what Christ is talking about in Matthew chapter 24. The Antichrist is going to be an abomination within himself because he's so vile and so perverted and so evil and wicked. So remember, y'all, in 2 Maccabees chapter 7, a woman and her 7 children were killed by the Greeks because they wouldn't eat pig fat. Read it for yourself. It'll tell you. All right, look at 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 7. 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 47. It says to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals. Right? You notice with these holidays, with Christmas and with Easter, and even with Thanksgiving, it's all about that pig, ham, all that stuff. See that? Look at 2 Maccabees 6 and 21. It says, those who were in charge of the unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him and privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing, proper for him to use, and to pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal that had been commanded by the king. All right, look at 1 Maccabees 1 and 50. And whoever does not obey the king shall die. So if you wasn't obeying these Greek and Roman customs, you was going to die. Look at 2 Maccabees 6 and 7. It says, on the monthly celebration of the king's birthday, the Jews were taken under bitter constraint to partake of the sacrifices, and when a festival of Dionysus was celebrated. Hold on. Dionysus is that Greek god that has the grapes on their head. Animal House, that's the song. I mean, that's the movie. Thanks, bro. I knew Jeff would know what it was. So Dionysus is that Greek god that be having the grapes on his head. He's the Greek god of partying. That's what they honor when they partying like a rock star, doing all that stuff, right? All right, go back. What did it say? This is 2 Maccabees 6 and 7, right? It says the Jews were taken under bitter constraint to partake of the sacrifices. And when a festival of Dionysus, I can't pronounce the word, it's a Greek god with the grapes on his head, Dionysus, was celebrated. All you got to do is Google it, the Greek god of partying and bull crap. That's what it is. Was celebrated. It said they were compelled to wear wreaths of ivy and to walk in the procession honor of Dionysus, the god that got the grapes on his head, at the secession of the people of Panimulius. A decree was issued to the neighboring Greek cities that they should adopt the same policy toward the Jews and make them partake of the sacrifices. Look at verse 9. And should kill those who did not choose to change over to Greek customs. See? One could see, therefore, the misery that had come upon them. Verse 10, for example, 2 women were brought in for having circumcising their children. They got mad at that. They said, you can't be circumcising your kids. See that? They like, you got to honor this Greek god, right? They publicly, now look what they did to these women who circumcised their children. Look what they did. They publicly paraded them around the city with their babies hanging at their breasts and hurled them down the headlong from the wall. See all this stuff that we don't learn? They ain't gonna tell you this stuff in church. I'm telling you, if your preacher get up tomorrow morning and start talking about the Feast of Dedication, the Illuminati gonna come after them. They're gonna be like, hey, you with us. You ain't supposed to be telling these people this. We're gonna say we're gonna make up a lie about you, say you had sex with a kid. Oh, please don't do that, Mr. Illuminati, man. Please don't do that. See, they ain't gonna talk about this stuff tomorrow. You better read it for yourself. Look at this. Look what they did to the women. This is 2 Maccabees chapter 6, verse 10. It says 2 women were brought in for circumcising their children. They publicly paraded them around the city with their babies hanging at their breasts and then hurled them down headlong from the wall. Verse 11, others who had assembled in the caves nearby in order to observe the 7th day secretly were betrayed to Philip, and they were all burned together because their piety kept them from defending themselves in view of their regard for the most holy day. So you have people hiding in caves so they can honor the Sabbath day, because the Greeks were saying you can't honor the Sabbath day. You got to be at church on Sunday morning to worship the Lord God and Jesus on Sunday. That's why we go to church on Sunday, because the Greeks and the Romans, they worship the sun. Hello. Some people may say, it don't matter what day we go to church. Okay, well, why do we go to church on Sunday if it don't matter? Duh. Come on, think, saints. I hear a lot of people say, it don't matter it don't matter about that. Well, why do we go to church on Sunday if it don't matter? All right, 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 52. It says, many of the people, everyone who forsook the law, joined them, and they did evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding in every place of refuge they had. See that? First Maccabees 2:31. And it was reported to the king's officers and to the troops in Jerusalem, the city of David, that those who had rejected the king's command had gone down to the hiding places in the wilderness. So the children of Israel was in the wilderness hiding from them Greeks because they wanted to follow the Lord's laws and commandments, which is the righteousness of the kingdom, who is Christ. Matthew 6:33. Right? Isaiah 33:22 says that the Lord is our king, our judge, and our lawgiver. So the remnant of Christ is hiding from these churches because they want to obey God's laws and commandments. See, same thing happening today. Look at Hebrews 11, verse 38. Of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. That's Hebrews 11, verse 38. Somebody probably saying, oh, he quoting the New Testament too. Yeah, duh. Yeshua comes in the volume of the book. That's him speaking. Right? Look at First Maccabees 1:54. Now on the 15th day of Shaliv, that's a Hebrew month, in the 140th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offerings. They also built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah. First Maccabees 2:12. And see, our holy place, our beauty, and our glory have been laid waste. The nations have profaned them. See? Look at 2 Maccabees 6:2. It says also to pollute the temple in Jerusalem and to call it temple of Olympian Zeus, and to call the one in Gizrium Zeus, the friend of strangers, as the people who live in that place are known. So they built the temple and called it the temple of the Olympian Zeus. Just like when you read in the book of Revelations about the seven churches. All right, all the seven churches that we read about in Revelation chapter 1, 2, and 3, all of those seven churches were in Turkey at that time. And when Christ was talking to that church, I forget what church it was, Christ told them, he said, you all have held fast to my name where Satan's seat is. And Satan's seat, where the seven churches was in Turkey, was the altar of Zeus. They had a whole lot of Greek altars surrounding the seven churches in the book of Revelations. You have the altar of Athena. You have the what's the name of that Greek god, Jeff? The medical god that got the staff and the snake around it, the medical Greek god that they honor in the medical world. All right, I forget what the name of that altar is, but it was a priest that would administer that altar, you know, that medicine altar with the staff, with the snake around it. It was a priest named Hippocratic that you had to take an oath to that medicine god in order to be healed. So that's why when somebody becomes a doctor, they have to take a Hippocratic oath. That's honoring that priest. See what I'm saying? So it was always a priest on let me look it up. The medical Greek god with the staff and the snake around it. What's the name of it? Yeah, Acuplius. Asapius. How you pronounce it? I can't pronounce these words. Hold on. Let me do it. I can't pronounce it. Here you go, right here. Okay, Asclepius. Asclepius was a Greek god with the snake, with the staff and a snake around it. And it was a priest named Hippocrates, and you had to take an oath to Asclepius, the Greek medicine god, in order to be healed. And that all of that was going on during the time of the seven churches in Turkey. All right. All right. Where we at? Second, okay. Yeah, so second Maccabees 6-2, they polluted the temple, called it Olympias Zeus. Right? Look at Second Maccabees 10-5. It said it happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place. That is on the 25th day of the same month, which was Chislev. All right. So y'all make sure y'all read the book of Maccabees because it shows how the Greeks was persecuting us. It's a very good book. First, second, and third, and fourth Maccabees. Remember the story about the mother and her 7 sons in Second Maccabees 7. All 7 of her sons, including her, was killed because they would not eat Greek food. And I mean, they wouldn't eat swine's flesh. It's all type of stories. But I didn't read enough. All right. But if Yahuwah permits, I'll come and talk about it tomorrow or Monday because the Feast of Dedication is 8 days. Now, let me tell y'all this. Thanks, bro. Oh, okay. The son of Apollo. Yeah, bro. So thank you, Jeff. So yeah, people had to sack that Hippocrates priest. You would have to sacrifice to Archipius, that medical god, in order to be healed. And so the priest Hippocrates, that's why you got to take the Hippocratic oath when you become a doctor. You got to take an oath to a Greek god. The medical symbol is the rod of Asclepius. That's right. That's what it is. If y'all look at the movie Black Dynamite, when they was in the restaurant and they was all breaking down the Greek gods because they was trying to figure out, that malt liquor that they was selling in the neighborhood. Yeah, they was in the restaurant breaking down the Greek gods, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, read Maccabees. Don't forget about the story about the woman and her 7 sons. That's just one of my favorite stories in the book of Maccabees. How those young men, those Greek soldiers killed all 7 of her sons because she wouldn't eat swine's flesh. That's Second Maccabees 7. And then they started sacrificing the money in the temple of Jerusalem to Hercules. Yeah, that's in Maccabees too. Y'all gotta look for it. I didn't read enough, man. Tired. So yeah, that's all I got tonight, y'all. I love y'all. This is all commemorating the Feast of Dedication, especially when we read Second Maccabees chapter 6. The Greeks came in the temple. They was having sex with prostitutes. They put swine's flesh on the altar. They hung up Greek gods. And so the spirit of the Lord and Judas Maccabees, along with the other children of Israel, they created a revolt and they destroyed the Greeks and they rededicated that temple. And so that's why we commemorate the Feast of Dedication. Remember, the Feast of Dedication is not a commandment. It is a day of remembrance because Moses did not command us to honor the Feast of Dedication in Leviticus chapter 29. But it is 8 days of remembrance. And so after Judas Maccabees rededicated the temple, they rededicated the temple of the Lord for 8 days. And the menorah that they put, which is the lampstand, which is the menorah, they burned that for 7 to 8 days. And remember the 7 bowls that is on the throne in the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verse 7. And then the 7 spirits of the Most High God in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. Then the Bible says in Revelations 4, chapter 4 and chapter 5, how Christ holds the 7 spirits of Yahuwah, the Most High Elohim, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What else happened in Maccabees? Whole lot of stuff. There were some priests in the book of Maccabees that converted into being Greek. The priest Eleazar decided that he didn't want to convert to being Greek. He wanted to honor the laws and commandments of Yahuwah. And they killed the priest Eleazar. They killed him. A lot of people got killed. All right. So that's the Feast of Dedication, Days of Remembrance. Jewish people call it Hanukkah. All right. But it's not Hanukkah. It's the Feast of Dedication. So when you read in John chapter 10, verse 22, it says on the day of the Feast of Dedication, which was in the winter. See? So your pastor and them can't say that ain't God. Like, yes, it is right here in John chapter 10, Pastor, and the book of Maccabees. All right, you all, Yahuwah, we bless you. We praise y'all. We adore you. We thank you for deliverance on tonight. We thank you for information. We thank you for making a new covenant where you're putting your laws and your commandments in our heart. And we bless you and we praise you and we adore you in Yeshua's mighty name. All right, you all have a good night. Love y'all in Yeshua's mighty name.